My name's Joan, I'm your games mistress, and here's a little bit about shuffling cards. Okay, so I've got a standard deck of 52 cards here. I've got them ordered by suit and ranked from king through ace. I'm going to start shuffling them, I'm going to shuffle for 30 seconds, and I'm going to see if we get any clumps of cards that are still in the same order that they were in before I started shuffling. Ready?
Go!
So when I was playing cards with my family as a little kid, and the grown-ups would shuffle, this is usually the way they would do it. This is called the overhand shuffle.
Stop!
Alright, so let's see what kind of clumps we have. Ooh, not great. I'm going to sort them. Okay, so that looks like 7 clumps of 2, 4 clumps of 3, and 3 clumps of 4 cards, which leaves only 14 cards out of 52. That's barely more than a quarter of them that weren't at least still in the same order with some of the cards before we started shuffling. So this seems like it's not a great way of shuffling cards, but let's try another version. Working at the cafe, I often see people shuffling using a variation of what's called the Hindu shuffle. I've got another deck here. It's in the same order. We're going to try 30 seconds of that version. We'll see how that goes. Ready?
Go! Stop!
No, I want to keep going. Alright. Let's see what we've got this time. Okay, so we've got 4 clumps of 2 cards, 2 clumps of 3 cards, 2 clumps of 4 cards, and a clump of 5, which leaves 25 cards. Less than half the deck has been separated from the cards that were next to them before I started shuffling.
Dun, dun, dun.
So this isn't great either, but what's the actual problem here? Why is this actually bad? Well, supposing you're using this deck of cards to play Crazy Eights. Crazy Eights is a card game, a little bit like Uno. You've got a hand of cards, you've got a discard pile in the middle, and when it's your turn, you have to play a card that matches the card in the discard, on top of the discard pile, either with its suit or its rank. So if the 5 of spades is on top, then you have to either play a 5 or a spade, and the goal is to run out of cards. This means that when you're playing Crazy Eights, you're going to get a lot of clumps of cards in the discard pile that are either the same suit or the same rank. And if you don't shuffle pretty thoroughly at the end of the game, the next game is going to be a little bit odd because a lot of the draws that people make off the top of the draw pile are going to be a match for the last card that came off the top of the draw pile, like a statistically weird number of them. This gets a lot worse in games like Ticket to Ride, for example, where players are trying to collect sets of cards in the same color, and then they put them in the discard pile in these same bunches. If you don't shuffle really well at the end of a game of Ticket to Ride, your next game is going to have all these weird runs of the same color coming up in long streaks. And if you're playing something like Ink and Gold, which we talked about a little while ago, supposing there's, I don't know, 2 spider cards that are in order.
Why is it always spiders?
Because you're playing Sephi. And if one of the spider cards is gone and 2 of them are in order, and that first spider card comes up, you're going to know either you get out or you get spidered. Now, maybe you don't mind all this because you're some kind of filthy cheater. Maybe you're playing Ticket to Ride and you're trying to collect as many blue cards as possible, and you just noticed that a blue card came off the top of the deck and somebody took it, and you want a blue card, so, well, why not just draw one off the top of the deck and, oh my goodness, look, it's blue, just like the last one, because a whole clump of blue cards didn't get shuffled properly. Lucky you. Now, if you play deck-building games like Dominion or Star Realms, you can cheat pretty egregiously this way, planning your turns around draws of clumps of the same card. And if you do this in poker or blackjack, you can basically steal money from your friends.
Yay! Oh, that's bad.
No, especially around this table, Sephi. You remember what happens to cheaters around here, don't you?
It's bad.
It's very bad. Don't cheat at my table. It can get even weirder in a game that has a story. I mean, take something like Dead of Winter, for instance. The Crossroads cards in that game are supposed to provide you with these random surprising events. I mean, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil any of them, but supposing you get the helicopter event right after the grocery store event. Probably won't be all that surprising then when the briefcase event comes right after that, just like it did last time you played. So let me show you a couple of ways to shuffle cards that will actually make sure that they're properly random and ready for a fresh game. We're going to try a different kind of shuffling here. This one's called a Riffle Shuffle. My dad taught me to do this when I was little. Ready? 30 seconds.
Go.
All right. This little bridge thing that I do at the end is just a fancy little flourish. You don't have to do that. It's actually a bit faster if you just go like this and push them together, but you don't impress your friends quite as much that way. Casino dealers also have a much more impressive way of doing this one, which I actually can't do.
Stop.
All right, let's see how we did with our clumps this time. All right, those two are together.
Oh my god.
So 2 clumps of 2, only 4 cards were still actually next to one of the cards that they were next to when we started the shuffle. And believe it or not, it would kind of be statistically weird if there weren't any cards that were together like that. I mean, supposing you had some sort of perfect shuffle that made it so that there was none of that going on in there, that would mean that you would still be able to cheat by knowing that the next card off the top of the deck is not going to be in the same order that it was last time. If it's truly random, that will happen once in a while. And that true randomness is what we're looking for in a card game. Now, supposing you're one of these game aficionados who likes to protect their card games with these little plastic sleeves. Make sure that if people spill their drink on a game, it won't necessarily wreck it. They're nice. They're really good, especially in a game cafe where there's drinks all over the place. However, if you try to do a riffle shuffle with these, yeah, not so good. But there is an alternative that you can use, and you can only do this with sleeve cards, in fact. Can we get another 30 seconds?
Yeah.
All right, because the sides are nice and sharp, you can slide them right in there, just like that. Can you see that okay? Not quite as good as a riffle shuffle, but you can do them very, very quickly. Please don't do this if you don't have sleeved cards. You will wreck the edges of your cards and fray them and destroy your beautiful games. Please don't do that.
Stop.
All right, let's see what kind of clumps we have this time. Well, how about that? All right, going to show you another one. I mentioned casino dealers a moment ago. This is one that they actually do use in casinos. Feel free to laugh, but I swear they do this every time they finish a poker hand. Ready?
Ready.
30 seconds.
Okay, go.
This is called washing the deck. If you had a younger sibling that's possibly may have played this game called 52 Pickup, which looks kind of shockingly similar to this.
Stop.
Okay.
Stop. I said stop.
I know. All right. So let's see how we did. Pretty effective. I especially like to do this one with Ticket to Ride cards because they're these tiny little cards which my gigantic hands have a hard time shuffling. Now, another group that has a particular interest in making sure that their deck of cards is very well shuffled is professional Magic the Gathering players. When you're playing Magic the Gathering, your deck of cards is going to have 2 types of cards in it, lands and spells. If you draw your hand of 7 cards at the start of the game and there's too much land and not enough spells, or too many spells and not enough land, you're probably going to lose. So Magic players have a special interest in shuffling cards. And they often are seen using a special form of shuffling called pile shuffling, which I'm going to demonstrate to you now. See how it goes. Ready?
Yes, and go.
I think that's all we have time for. So unless I miss my guess, we're actually not going to have any clumps here. There we go. That one takes a while, but it is pretty effective at avoiding clumps. In fact, it avoids clumps altogether sometimes, which can actually be a problem. See, human brains are actually really bad at probability analysis. I'm going to explain with an experiment that you can try at home with your friends and family. It's an exercise that they do in university-level statistics classes. They divide the class into two groups. Everybody in group 1 has to flip a coin 100 times and write down the results on a piece of paper. Everybody in group 2 has to fill in the same form, but instead of flipping an actual coin, they'll just fill in the form at random, trying to be as random as possible on purpose. Then the papers all get mixed together in a big pile, and the professor goes through that pile and tries to guess which papers came from group 1 and which ones came from group 2. And the prof is usually right, because the prof knows something that the students probably don't know at that point. And that is that the ones that are actually random, because the students used a coin, will usually have at least one really long streak, like 8 heads in a row or 6 tails in a row. The ones that were filled out supposedly at random, never. This is because human brains are easily fooled into thinking that if there's any kind of pattern, it can't possibly be random. So in their efforts to make the results look more random by avoiding long streaks, they end up revealing the truth that it wasn't random at all. If you do try this at home, let me know how it goes in the comments, would you? Back to Magic the Gathering. I really enjoy watching streamers play Magic Arena, which is the online version of the game, and it always cracks me up whenever they complain about how the software that shuffles the cards is conspiring somehow to make their opponent draw statistically unlikely combinations of cards for some nefarious purpose. But it's actually just their human brains trying to impose patterns on a random universe.
I mean, I can't even believe we drew 4 of the 6 Snowlands out of the 100-card deck. Hands like this should be a crime.
Dun, dun, dun.
Shuffler?
It's like an epic tragedy at the start of every game in 7 cards. I love it. I can't get enough of it. And if you aren't getting statistically weird strings of cards, that is actually a statistical anomaly. If you're playing Magic with physical cards, and you rarely seem to get flooded with too much mana or screwed with not enough, I think there's a fair chance that your pile shuffling may actually be rigging the cards in your favor. When you set up a game of Pandemic, you take the player deck and divide it into even piles, and each of those piles gets 1 of the green Epidemic cards. Then each pile is shuffled separately, and you stack the piles on top of each other to make the deck, so it's guaranteed that you won't get more than 2 Epidemics clumped together. And that makes sense for the way that game is designed. It doesn't make sense for Magic, or for most card games for that matter. Now, real talk here. In some games, actually in a lot of games, randomizing the cards doesn't actually matter that much. If you're playing a party game like Taboo or Codenames, you've just got so many possible word combinations, it's not really worth worrying about. Nobody's going to remember what order they were in anyway. In a game like Monopoly, also, where the game tells you when to draw cards, you don't get to decide when to draw them, but the game will tell you when you roll dice and land on chance or community chest. The order of the cards doesn't matter that much because the question of when you're going to draw them is already a matter of random chance. And if you're playing a game with super low emotional stakes, where nobody's all that heavily invested in the outcome, then of course there's no reason to really worry all that much about whether the deck has been stacked. I mean, most players aren't going to be too concerned about whether they win or lose at Candyland, so you can pretty much just relax and let the cards fall as they may. But if you want to play, if you want to engage with a game and you're invested in what's going on, and your game happens to have random card draws in it, I hope that this video has given you some helpful thoughts about why randomness matters and how you can make sure that randomness will be there for you, really be there for you at the game table when you want it there. Thank you so much for watching. This channel is supported by Patreon. You can also hire me to help you make the most of your game nights at joanthegamesmistress.com. If you can't afford to, please keep tuning in. You can still help me out for free with a like, sub, ding. And if you'd like to tell me in the comments about whether you hate shuffling or love shuffling, or have tips for helping people to get better at it, I'd love to hear about all of them. Remember though, mean comments get deleted, mean people get banned, so play nice. Your turn.